But the climate narrative, at the very root of the narrative, is othering the world. That is, to see the climate, see nature, see as the living world as something distinct and other from human beings, from human culture, from human civilization. So that's where the narrative just falls apart, and why it won't work, and hasn't worked, by the way.
Welcome to the We Need to Act, the podcast about the people, ideas, and movements shaping a better now. I'm Sara, your host, an academic and sustainability professional who believes that understanding the world is the first step to changing it. Each episode, I sit down with extraordinary guests from around the world, scientists, activists, Indigenous leaders, entrepreneurs, and thinkers who are doing the work and living the change. I'm incredibly honored to welcome Paul Hawken as my guest today, author, entrepreneur, and one of the most influential voices of the intersection of ecology and commerce. Paul is the founder of Project Drawdown and Project Regeneration, two of the most comprehensive efforts to map solutions for restoring climate stability and the biosphere. He's the author of 9 books, 6 of which are New York Times bestsellers, including The Ecology of Commerce, Drawdown, and Regeneration. His latest book, Carbon, the Book of Life, was published in March 2025. Apart from all of this introduction, he's an extremely intelligent and caring human being. Paul, it is a truly honor to welcome you on the We Need to Act podcast. And I want to start with probably everyone knows you, everyone that it's connected to the sustainability world. You are a renowned person, environmentalist, activist, economist, author, and many other things. And your book, Carbon, is an ode to the unseen world, the interconnectedness of everything that makes nature incredibly magical. It was really touching for me. However, most of people are completely unaware of it, what is happening around us. And why have we demonized carbon in a way? Because we only talk about carbon emissions nowadays, that we need to reduce carbon. And does this reveal a fundamental problem of education?
Yeah, very, very, very much so. I would say that the way carbon got seen as the problem, as a culprit, demonized is the word you used, is because of, I would call, the climate narrative. In other words, what is the narrative here? And in terms of the science, we've understood the science for a very, very long time. So that's not an issue, right? But the climate narrative, at the very root of the narrative, is othering the world. That is, to see the climate, see nature, see as the living world as something distinct and other from human beings, from human culture, from human civilization. So that's where the narrative just falls apart, and why it won't work, and hasn't worked, by the way, because we knew everything we needed to know 50 years ago about the cause and what to do. It was not a mystery, you know. And after 50 years of understanding what is happening and what would happen if we did not act upon what we knew in terms of climate science, less than 1% of the world is doing anything about it on a daily basis. So 50 years, is like, actually this could be the end of civilization if we keep going that way. But I wouldn't say it that way, but that's the truth. And we have less than 1% of the world saying, yeah, well, thanks for sharing, and I'm busy, And so that means I'm not blaming people. I'm not at all. The people who are acting like you, this podcast and your guests and so forth, are extraordinary. I'm talking about the narrative, which is different, and so forth. And even, 2 guests ago, you had somebody who said, we can fix the climate crisis. He can fix it. Okay. So who fixes things around the world? That's a very male thing. I'm a fixer. I race motorcycles. I love fixing things, But the thing is, the climate crisis, we're going to fix the climate crisis. Well, it's like, time out. First of all, the climate can't have a crisis. It's impossible. I mean, so let's get rid of that term right away. But that is an example of and I would say, with all due respect to my gender, a very male othering kind of understanding or statement or belief that we can fix the climate crisis. Well, there's no crisis and we can't fix it. Okay. And because fix is doing something to something else, right? Like, and so right at the core of carbon, and the book Carbon, the Book of Life, is really the trying to create the understanding that carbon is the source of life. It is life itself in an elemental sense. I mean, it's the only element that actually has memory and can store energy. Sodium can't do it, phosphorus can't do it, nitrogen can't do it. I mean, go on and on and on. Carbon can, and that's why there's about 10 billion carbon molecules in every cell, of your body, and you have 30 some odd trillion cells. I mean, you start looking, and carbon is so ubiquitous, so suffused into the fabric of life that we don't even think about it, right? And then, so the idea is that, well, CO2, carbon dioxide, is a greenhouse gas for sure. And then, we've tipped the balance, the imbalance really. But I mean, now, because of burning fossil fuels, we're burning nature. Coal, gas, and oil are nature. They came from oil marine deposits, and coal and natural gas came from swamp forests. And so we know they came from plants and fish or marine organisms. And now we're combusting them, burning them, and saying, well, there's this, we have an imbalance in CO2. Well, yeah. It's like, it was buried, it was in the ground, yeah, and now we're putting it up in the air. And so the amount of heat transfer now from the Earth has always transferred heat into the atmosphere, and the sun has always warmed the atmosphere, but that is now imbalanced, because we're emitting so much carbon dioxide and methane too, other greenhouse gases, but primarily CO2. So I want to go back to the narrative though, because it's interesting, Sarah, because I was being interviewed by a really cool company, the CEO, and they make truly a plastic substitute that's natural and, and they're quite big now. They're doing very well. And we're on stage, and I was saying, the climate narrative failed because it's othering nature and people and places and culture, and but particularly the climate, the so-called climate. And he sort of pushed back, a little bit, just as a questioner. He was, he's interviewing me. And we had about 100 people in the room. I think half are more corporate, and I forget the others, but really interesting audience. I'd say about half women, half men. And I said, okay, wait. Will any woman here raise her hand? Will a woman here raise her hand if they've never been othered in their life? No one raised their hand. And what was so important? I mean, it was really interesting to see the faces of the women and the men, because the men were looking around, looking for a raised hand. There wasn't one raised hand. And so every man there knows deep down, or up here knows, well, I'm the otherer. Who's othering the women? So that's a way to illustrate the ubiquity of the language and the belief that, that nature is distinct, that it's separate, that it's other, and that we can fix it, and all sorts of phrases come out. You see book titles and podcasts, and so forth, about that. And I don't fault the people or their intention or their motivation. Not at all. Not at all. But I'm just saying that language it's very Western language too. Very, very Western.
Because we don't see that in Indigenous language.
No, we don't. No, we don't even see first person.
That's right.
Plural. I, we. What do you mean I, we? It's like, yeah. And so we just have to understand that we grew up and got educated into a way of speaking and understanding that actually keeps us distinct, separate from being I wouldn't say from being, from an understanding of the inextricable connectivity between everything on earth, you know. In fact, I had an idea the other day for a book cover. So I was thinking new, but it showed the Earth, you know, the Earth from space, you know, like the new photographs that just came from the Artemis, you know, trip around the moon. They took a new picture of the Earth. Thank you. But it said, the picture says, we can't fix this. We can't fix it.
No.
We can definitely fuck it up. Excuse my
Yeah,
English.
that's true.
But we can't fix it. It fixes itself.
Itself, but yeah.
Yeah, life, that's what life
It
does.
will fix us if we don't.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it will. And so that's why I wrote Carbon, the Book of Life, because it's just so mystical, mysterious, extraordinary, fascinating, complex, in ways that we don't, maybe not we, but most, at least I can speak for myself, did not understand, was not taught, you know, in school. And it's more or less looking at it, at the world in just in a way that makes you thrilled, makes you happy, makes you in awe, you know, gives you just like that sense of it's the sacred, really, that the earth is the sacred. It is the mother. Yeah, I mean, no culture in the world didn't say Mother Earth. No one said Father Earth. They said Mother Earth. Why? Because she is the mother. Earth is the mother. That's where all creation comes from, you know? And to me, that way of seeing the world is the way then to be in the world. Okay, now what am I going to do? What am I going to say? What am I going to buy? What am I going to make? From there, you arrive solutions, you know, solutionism. I've done the solutionism books, by the way. So, you know,
Yeah,
Drawdown.
regeneration.
Oh, I know solutionism, but from there, we just see the world in a different way, you know, and it's right there in front of us. I mean, it's not like, you know, you have to learn something or read a book. No, you don't. Somebody asked me once, what's the best thing I could do? I said, go outside, stay there. Just look, smell, see. I mean, yeah, yeah. Watch. Yeah. And,
Just take a moment, pause. And I'm really inspired by this because I'm a researcher at the university here, and also I have a PhD in sustainability communication. So this is really a hot topic for me, how people communicate, and going back to Indigenous peoples, because this platform of the We Need to Act was also created to welcome all the voices around the world to share their experience, not to westernize their knowledge, but in a way that what they want to share with us. And so we
yes,
can
yeah.
learn from them. And I do remember Casey Kemp Hornick. Do you know her from the Ponca Nation? And
Mhm.
she was always telling, we are nature itself. And they have a way in their stories, in their narratives of integrating this interconnectedness between human beings, of everything, and human beings and nature. And as you said, they don't even have a word for nature, right? In many cases. So, and like a few years ago, Sir David Attenborough also said that this is like a problem of communication, a crisis of communication, because we know what to do. We just need the will. So, how can we not fix, how can, let's not use the word fix. How can we restore our connection with the mother nature, and also pertain to the 7 generation principle for those who don't know that think 7 generations ahead when doing something.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things there. One is, David Attenborough, who's like our saint, you know, I mean, but we don't know what to do. I disagree. We do not. And we know things that are good to do, but that overarching statement, we know what to do. Who's we? Who's he talking about? You know, no, so
Well,
that's number one.
scientists, perhaps.
But I'm just saying, the word sustainability is what I call a weasel word, which has no meaning. You're a PhD, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, I know you have to use it, but it has no meaning whatsoever, you know. And it's just a word that, you know, Westerners use, you know, to say, well, I don't know why they use it, frankly, but they use it to refer to something that's better, good, and right, you know, about something else, you know, and as if, well, what's just, I mean, it's the whole language again is something as a writer, I just the language and say, well, what does that word mean? And then I would even question the word, the first person plural. You know, in other words, using that word, somebody came to me once when I was using it and just asked the question, who's we? Well, that's a good question. I don't speak for you. Okay. And there's just two of us right now. So if I say we, well, who am I to speak for you? Right. And, or anybody else for that matter. And so that is such an egocentric, you know, pronoun, I mean, way of seeing the world, you know. And so there's so many books out there now, by the way, and podcasts and people, you know, who, and lovely, lovely human beings, by the way, but who, you know, I say, well, they have this idea, we can do this, and this is how to solve a problem. This is how to, you know, heal the earth and all those sort of things. And again, I don't question their intention or even necessarily what they do, but I do question the assumption and the belief that there is a way, you know, this, if we do this, it's done, you know, we, and all that first person plural. And I would just step back from that because you point out, and you're absolutely right, that you look at indigenous languages, those languages that arose from place. When we say indigenous, what does it mean? It means indigenous. It means place, you know. Eh, And those cultures emerge from those places. We don't know when, you know, how many 10,000 or more years back. And so the language that emerged was the language of place. And it's interesting because our languages, Portuguese, English, French, Spanish, let's say the Western languages, are noun-based languages. We have a lot of nouns because it's the language of separation, of distinction. Of say, well, this is a this, but it's not a that. I just want to say, like, don't get confused. You know, I'm a scientist, you know, and I'll tell you how they're different, and they are different. You know, if you separate everything out, then you can say, well, this is a different molecule, this is a different mineral, this is a different gas, this is a different, you know, whatever. And but that distinction, you know, that need or to separate the world doesn't arise when you're living, emerging from the living world, your culture, your language, your children, you know, your practices, your food, you know, their rhythm, you know, the annual rhythm of being in a place, you know, in terms of heat, cold, water, animals, fish, if you're near water. I mean, all those things. And so when you look at the very few dictionaries that are out there of indigenous languages, they're verb-based, they're metaphorical. And it was Plato, not my favorite philosopher at all, by the way, but who said metaphor is genius. And these are metaphorical languages. And so there's so much we can look, even the seven generations, you know, we think of generation as 20 years. It's a generation is 70 years. And so many of the Native Americans had the prophecies that were shared about that the colonists would come, the settlers, the colonists, you know, it was predicted. And in their predictions that it'd be seven generations of colonization before I can't even, I shouldn't speak for indigenous people or nations, but it was like, it would take 500 years, 490 plus years, 500 years, which is just about right where we are, you know, 1492, Columbus. But really the early 1500s, right? You know, before Spain and in Portugal and all these other countries, you know, basically colonized Africa, colonized South America, West America, and North America, the English and the French to the north. And so that era is over, and we're seeing it expressed beautifully by the President of the United States about how over it really is, and just how corrupt, idiotic, insane, deluded, greedy, all those sort of things. So he's like the golem in the Jewish tradition. He's actually representing everything that we've created over 500 years, which is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, I'm so sad for you.
I think it's great. It's like, hey, this is who we are. This is
Like a wake-up
America.
call also, right? Yeah.
I hope so.
And we have seen, like, you brought this discussion, and I had a question regarding that, because we have in this path towards, let's say, regeneration and not sustainability. So we have seen that the US has dropped from major agreements, divested, and went back to promoting this fossil fuel based economy. And we
Right.
also see that Europe is kind of slowing down in the race towards a green economy, rolling back important regulation and easing some measures and benefiting lobbyists in a way. So my question would be like, and think about one of your books, Regeneration. Can we really regenerate the world in one generation? And looking at our political ecosystem now and the lack of faith that people have.
Well, first of all, what it said is ending the crisis in one generation. And the crisis is lost, is our thinking and way of being. Yeah, no, we can't. We can't. So regeneration, I think everything we see, whether it's Trump or, you know, what the extractive capitalist world is doing, to forest, rivers, the sea, just, animals, we've lost 73% of the 34,000 different creatures that have been monitored for the last 50 years, so, pollinators down 60%. So anyway, this is the world we live in, which is just being taken apart and destroyed and killed. So what I was trying to say is like, well, that's degeneration for sure, and, but we can see the end of the road now. I think many people saw it a long time ago, but more and more people are understanding that and seeing that. They may not be in power, because we have a political system that really rewards completely the wrong attributes and qualities, of a human being. But put that aside, and we can see that we can't go much further, and so regeneration is like, well, what can you do about that? Well, you just stop, first of all, and you turn around. The only way we can go is the other way. There is no other way to go in the short or long term. In other words, I don't know how long we can keep doing what we're doing, but I do know that the only way we can actually address the suffering, the loss, of the living world, what it does for us and what it does for all, 3.9 trillion other creatures that are our Earth mates that live here with us. That's just a guesstimate as to the number, but a lot. And 8.4 million species, different species, and so forth. The only way we can, honor, support, and create the conditions for life on Earth is to regenerate life. And that's what regeneration means, which is when you do something, create more life, not less. We inherit an economy that just creates less life, less life, Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But how do you, in a way, because we have to, well, the business world has to also to embrace this change. It is not only up to individuals. We need everyone on a board to move forward and regenerate the planet, because they have, and their power is increasing. And as you well said in your book Carbon, in terms of the biodiversity crisis, and as you mentioned now, they have seen this late. As you said, it is unsettling to witness how long it took for nature to come to the fore in the business world. And we see that in different COPs, for instance, even at the international level, how these two subjects, two topics are treated differently. That this tunnel vision for climate change and then biodiversity, and they are connected. And even for businesses, they don't see the value of nature, and they have to put a value on it to make it more appealing.
Exactly. And that will never work. I mean, the idea that even something from John Elkington this morning, nature should be in the boardroom, like I'm rolling my eyes. John is a dear friend I love and respect. But
I interviewed him a
oh
few weeks ago.
yeah. He's a lovely, lovely human being, so smart too. And but we think business is the problem. It's the boardroom that's the problem. You can't say I'm going to put nature in it or start to use different language. The problem is a capitalist system that basically wants to create more capital. That is financial capital, not natural capital. And I wrote a book called Natural Capitalism once, which is what would it be like to live in a world where actually the capital that you wanted to increase was human capital. That is, music, song, dance, creativity, literature, being good mothers and fathers, to our children, and natural capital, which is the living world. And intellectual capital too. But I mean, what would a world look like that's the capitalism that we want to have more of? But the capital we want more of it's just money, cost, and it's being created by countries, by governments. Money's created. And so there's a smaller group of people who are very good at concentrating it and then turning around and investing in other businesses that will concentrate more money. So there's a death spiral that we're in right now. And the idea that it'll be renewable energy, and we'll just shift to that and everything's going to be okay. It will not be okay just with renewable energy. And we can talk about whether it's renewable is another subject, but we have now a market for carbon. You can buy and sell it. We have a nature market. Really, you can have biodiversity credits and you can buy it if you're Microsoft. I just bought some biodiversity credits. I mean, and I say we, very as Western, cultures that came out of the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, the Catholic Church and all those other things. I mean, we're the ones who created a market for people, enslaved beings, for ivory tusks. We created markets for ivory tusks. I mean, we're the ones who created markets for slavery, of course, so forth. I mean, I'm not saying that other cultures in Africa didn't have slaves. They did. I did. I mean, so forth. So I mean, but we're the ones who really made it global. And then we're the one who, again, the Western European, trying to sell the living world to the highest bidder. Who will pay the most for this forest that's been there for 2,000 years? Because we're cutting it down and it's really cool wood and it has so many uses and so forth. Who's going to pay the most for it? And somebody bids for it, right? And they cut it and they sell it. So that's what we're doing to the whole living world and selling it to the highest bidder. So the idea that somehow this economic entity called capitalism and business and commerce, to somehow meld itself with nature and bring it into the boardroom and start to think of itself as part of the living world. I mean, it's a fantasy because it's capitalism. Yeah.
Well, we will have to change system. It is also impossible to measure the biocultural ties that we have with nature. For instance, this connection with trees. Trees are not just carbon sinks. They are the experience we have under trees, the gatherings, the shade, everything that inspires our lives. That has a value, right, to everyone. It's not
Okay.
tangible.
Again, like with profound respect to you, you just said that has a value.
Value, yeah, that's true. Not, yeah. Let's try to
I
find
mean,
it word like,
it has, it's giving life.
yeah, that's it.
That's what it's doing. I mean, a tree is absorbing all the CO2, growing, produces a habitat. both above ground and below ground too, and for insects and for birds, and for animals, for gibbon monkeys, for also, and this just keeps growing and growing and proliferating and so forth. And yes, it cleanses the air, it modifies temperature, cools the earth. I mean, it goes on and on, check, 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 check. We know these things, but to call it a value is what we're saying the value to whom? The forest is not creating value. The forest is being a forest. And so so we see value because we compare it to no forest, right? Well, if we hadn't cut it down, my God, look all the benefits. That's another word, the benefits of the forest and so forth. Now you go. All I'm trying to get is to the mindset that we have, all of us, me too, by the way, carry around the way we've been educated, that lends itself, that leads us to talk about it in an objectifying way, and we go, I do too. I'm not pointing fingers at people. You go right back to it because it's so inculcated. And that's why I really appreciate what you're saying about indigenous cultures. If you look at the language, it is the teaching itself. It is a profound teaching. It's as profound as Buddhism or other ancient spiritual practices. Those languages innately are a teaching that is some of the most profound teachings that humanity has ever come up with.
It's true. And you also mentioned religion. Was it some of the things that pushes away nature, Catholicism and other religions that put human beings above everything else? And so, as you mentioned, we have to kind of, don't like the word shift, but change the way we perceive or see ourselves within the ecosystem, nature, because it's really hard to discuss this subject with other people in general and say, like, we are part of this bigger system, and we are no better than whales, for instance, that we just are different. We don't know. We are just starting to learn how they communicate. And I spoke with Dr. Mere from Maori. She has a beautiful project to save whales, and it's amazing, their incredible intelligence and sense of community. But people in general, they don't understand. They say, no, they are animals. So how do we change that?
Yeah, well, with ourselves first, I mean, and by appreciating, by gratitude, by understanding, from the Maori woman you talked about, who is very, very knowledgeable of whales. And it's funny, I'm thinking of doing a book called The Parliament of Earthlings. And yeah, I shouldn't say the title because, please don't use it, anybody. I got it from another woman, Barbara Kernbacher, an amazing, amazing scientist who died very quickly, suddenly. She's in British Columbia, Vancouver. Amazing woman. But it came about and years ago, I was at a sustainability educational program for 2 days for Interface, a company in Georgia. And they'd sent 100 of their staff, to have all these seminars and learn about sustainability. And in Bermuda, of course, fly everybody there. Don't worry about the carbon. And the first speaker was a guy named Benjamin Zander. He is the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic, and he's also conducted the London Philharmonic. He was a musician when he was 9 years old. He was writing music. He's an extraordinary man. He's got maybe the most watched TED Talk there is, actually, and I recommend everybody to watch it. He came to the room, and he's tall, and his hair sticks up and gray, and and he has for people in Georgia, he has a funny accent. Of course, English people would think people in Georgia have a funny accent, but anyway, he has very accenty, very proper, very well educated, extraordinary man, and so forth. And he came in, and he had a piano there, and then everybody thought, well. And he was introduced. So what's a conductor doing here about sustainability? I mean, they didn't get the connection at all, and he smiled, looked at everybody and so forth. And he said, is it anybody's birthday today? And one person sort of raised their hand in the back. And he said, what's your name? He said, Bill. I said, Bill, come on up here. Come on up here. And he got a chair. He said, sit here, and facing the audience, And he said, and he turned to everybody and said, let's sing happy birthday for Bill. And you could hear everybody kind of groan, like, oh. And he said, ready? And he just sort of gestured. And then it came, I don't know if this is true in Portugal, but in English or America, happy birthday is probably the worst sounding song you've ever heard in your life. It's a dirge, happy birthday to you. It's just like,
Sounds
oh my
better
God.
in Spanish.
Yeah, it sounds better. Well, I think everything sounds better in Spanish, but I think that this song is really, really bad. And then Ben said, do you think he's going to remember this? And, everybody kind of, well, no, I mean, He said, let's try again. Okay. And he said, stand up. He said, everybody stand up. And then he reached behind him and hit middle C. Da, 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 da. He said, hum it. So he looked at everybody's eyes. Everybody. He made eye contact. Okay. He said, okay. And everybody going, the whole room. It sounded beautiful, actually. Everybody humming the same note, and all the different sounds, tenor, bass, soprano, And he said, okay. And then he got his baton and he started to conduct happy birthday, And by the time they got to the second stanza of the song, second line, the group is singing in 4-part harmony. They'd never sung together before in their life. And people from the hotel were going around looking, what's going on in there? It's so beautiful. So I had tears in my eyes. It was so like, what? And after it was done, everybody was smiling. They were giggling. They were laughing. They were happy, So later, anyway, actually, next thing that he had them do was sing Ode to Joy in German from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. That was the last 2 minutes of Ode to Joy. But anyway, and they did, by the way. But I talked to him later and I said, what are you doing? I mean, you're a conductor, And he said, oh no, he said, I'm not waving this around to tell people what to do. He said, I am listening to all the voices, the musicians, their music. I'm listening to all the voices. And what I'm trying to draw out is their voice. And I can tell I can do that when their eyes are shining. If their eyes are shining, we're doing good. But if they're not shining, then, something is not right, and so forth. So I'm looking for shiny eyes. And he said, then he said something which I never forget. He said, leadership is listening to all the voices. And so there's, like I say, 3.9 trillion voices on this earth, 3.9 trillion voices. And who are we listening to? Such a tiny, tiny, tiny little narrow speck of life is on social, we're reading it, it's on the news, it's, in movies, it's entertainment, it's on TV. It's just the tiniest, tiniest voice on earth. And so the Parliament of Earthlings is saying, let's listen to all the voices. And they're so fascinating. I mean, Katie Payne, her husband, Roger Payne, was the one who first recorded, the whales, and that went all around the world, that produced music and so forth, blue whales. She, her specialty was elephants, and she was at the Portland Zoo, and she was watching the elephants were separated in different pens by big concrete walls. And she was watching an elephant every day go to the wall, the concrete wall, and put her head against the wall and just stand there. And she couldn't figure out why is it doing that? Just like standing there. And then a friend of hers said, basically, record it and speed it up. She said, what? Yeah, he said, record it. He said, there's nothing going on. He said, record it, speed it up. Elephants communicate infrasonically. We can't hear it. They can. And so she's talking. She's communicating to the elephant on the wall. Yeah. And vice versa. And that's a whole, I mean, now, that we know, elephants, of course, have communication that we can hear, of course. But, there's bats, there's mother bats. One guy studied it for 10 years. mother bats speak in ultrasonic, which we can barely hear, not really, and so forth. Mother bats teach their children, name their children, name them, give them names, and then teach them which of the male bats are kind of bastards and not really good, and watch out for those guys. And I mean, this is bats, talking to bats, and communicating. And so that's why I feel like listening to all the voices is really about, and I would say all about the indigenous voices, of course, is a way of sort of becoming deeply, deeply appreciative of the living world. It's just like, oh my God, I live here. It's like, and these are, I question whether we have intelligence sufficient enough to understand the intelligence of other species. Why do we think our intelligence will understand the intelligence of a given monkey or that elephant or of a blue whale, or sperm whale? I mean, just because we can record it, and put it on tape and then listen to it with earphones and so forth. But do we really know? Can we ever know that intelligence? I don't know.
Probably not, I think.
Probably not.
Because if we can't understand each other,
Right.
how can we understand other beings? I think that's
Yeah.
something out of our reach. And well, we are heading towards the end of our conversation, but I wanted to ask something about social systems also, because we have been talking about people, indigenous, they are vulnerable people. They have this huge knowledge regarding nature, yet they are more impacted by climate change as a vulnerable communities as women, children. And you also mentioned that the social systems require the same level of care, attention, and kindness as ecosystems. They are incomparable yet inseparable. Can you comment on that? And you also mentioned in the beginning women and the fact that we have this gender inequality and
Yeah.
probably this imbalance between masculine and feminine energy.
Well, one of the things that I am creating with some friends is called the Alliance for Earth. And you can go to theallianceforearth.org, okay? Type it in. And all you'll see a placeholder for it right now, okay? Because we're creating it. I may have sounded like, somehow humans are the problem and, they're doing the language is wrong and this and I think human beings are spectacular and are wondrous and amazing and beautiful. And I believe that the largest movement in the history of humankind is arising right now. Everywhere, like the Maori woman you mentioned, everywhere, every country. And they are creating organizations or groups or communities or coalitions or networks or, whatever different names of, but the creating is community. I mean, notice people getting together and dedicated to doing something, to regenerating something, to restoring something, to, honoring, to, addressing the suffering of other animals or people or places and so forth. And I say it's the largest movement on earth, and we don't see it. We can't know it because it is small and ubiquitous everywhere. And what we see is the concentration of power. It's in our newspapers, it's in our media, or even in TikTok because somebody has, 1 million followers, that's concentration, that's not community. And so the Alliance for Earth is a website. It's 105 languages. You just click any language you want. So you could be communicating in Portuguese and so forth. I can go click and I can understand it immediately. If it's your website, something you said or write, whatever, and so forth. But there's 105 languages. You can go black and white. In other words, it can be white background, but in many countries, power, electricity is pretty precious and not always available. So if you have a black background, you use much less energy on a website than if you have a white background. It's just simple things like that. And the whole purpose of the Alliance for Earth is for all these thousands, tens of thousands of organizations and people to be able to connect to each other, see each other, find each other. If I want to know about reforestation, who's doing reforestation in Botswana? There they are. They don't speak English, no problem. I mean, again, it's to try to produce the means where the humanity that wants to restore life on Earth can connect to itself, see itself, as opposed to what we see, in the media.
That's true. And the community is really important for us to find. To
Only way life
just
organized, life only organizes in community. We're life. So as soon as we try to do it in other ways, it creates war, it creates misunderstanding, it creates separation, of course, and all the things that come from that, because it's not community. In community, you can have people who have maybe different views of the world, but they trust each other, they know each other. I saw that, in farm communities. You have very conservative people, or very this, but in community, boom, connected, help each other, work, support, and we're just like life. Every cell is a community. Every cell in your body is a community. And that little carapace, that little layer, that little fatty, thin layer that encapsulates your cell, you take that away, and all are atoms and molecules. There's no life. There's no life in the cell per se. It's a chemistry experiment. But once it's encapsulated, it's a community. Now it's life. And nobody can explain that. No scientist. I mean, there's descriptions of it. I mean, I read those descriptions. I'm fascinated. But to say, well, how did that happen? All life exists in community. No other place. There is no other vestige of life other than community, and that's in the cell. And so, yes, and I just think because of what humanity has done to itself and to others and to the world and to creatures and forests and places and seas and oceans and lakes and rivers and grasslands and so on, it's like saying it wants to heal. It wants to come together, but it's coming together in small communities. And so the Alliance for Earth.org is like saying that connect,
Mhm.
learn,
Is it
from each
open
other.
for people to join?
I have to see where it is right now, whether you can,
Okay.
like I say, it's just starting, so we're
Okay.
building it. We have no money, but we, we try to do it.
You
But,
have the idea and you have the spirit and the
and
motivation.
yeah, yeah, you're so
And it
welcome.
has been a really incredible conversation. But I have so many questions I would like to ask you, but let's leave to another episode. And
Okay.
I'm truly honored. And do you have any final message, words you would like to share with our listeners? Call to action, something.
Yeah, I would say one thing. Do not try to save the earth. The earth is here to save you. Madre, our mother.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.